Too many alerts and not enough action? It's time to get SaltStack. SaltStack is an intelligent IT automation platform that detects security issues in critical business systems and then actually fixes them. With SaltStack, security and IT teams work together to define custom security policies with certified checks for CIS, DISA-STIGs, and more. You can scan systems for millions of compliance checks in minutes. Remediate compliance and vulnerability issues with powerful automation, all in a single platform. Visit securityweekly.com/SaltStack to learn more.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by Matt Alderman and John Kinsella. Here at SysDig, we're what you might call container obsessed. It starts with our unique technology, which listens to the heart of the operating system to surface the deepest data with the least overhead. To learn more about SysDig, visit securityweekly.com/SysDig. You can now submit your suggestions for guests in our recently released guest suggestion form. Go to securityweekly.com/guests and enter your suggestions. We've heard from our listeners that they love our content, but the amount of content we distribute can sometimes be overwhelming. We've recently released our customizable listener interest list. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe and click the button to join the listener list and let us know your interests. Matt, John, it's been a fun week this week in news. There's a couple of interesting breaches in the news, as well as one of the things that I wanted to jump into was a cool note about another fingerprint, 3D printed fingerprint being used to unlock an Android, a Galaxy S10. And this one kind of stood out for me because if you look at it, the researcher in this case just lifted a fingerprint. So you need access to somebody's fingerprint. 3D print on a very thin film. And then because a lot of fingerprint sensors now, they're looking for, the engineers aren't dumb. They're looking for like blood flow, essentially, sign of life. Is this a human with a fingerprint pushing against the detector? But in this case, the researcher was able to bypass it using someone else's fingerprint. And what was funny about this is way back in around May 2002, there was a Japanese cryptographer, Tsutomu Matsumoto, who pretty much showed the exact same thing, bypassing biometric fingerprint scanners, essentially using gummy bears. So would basically take, lift a fingerprint from someone else and then mold that fingerprint using gelatin, so a gummy bear. And then that alone, back in 2002 was a way to bypass that fingerprint sensor. So it was just one of those funny things about talking about threat models. Our threat models don't necessarily change that much. It's sort of the attacker creativity and attacker tooling maybe gets a little bit more interesting, whether we go from, a little bit of gelatin to some more fun 3D printing.
So does that mean we all have to go to face recognition now?
So very likely, I know that there was actually when Apple's, when the iPhone came out with FaceTime with face recognition, there were some people, researchers also diving into that, building up their own, taking photos, high-res photos, creating human faces, and using those to attempt to bypass those locks as well. So faces, it sounds like, are just maybe I shouldn't say a lot harder to beat. So if we're going to lose our fingers, we're going to lose our faces. I'm not sure what's next for even more secure authentication to our devices.
It's there's researchers out there who have also put time into figuring out what type of face paint do you need to be able to confuse the face recognition algorithms. And I wonder, it's only a matter of time till we're out at either a concert or walking down the street or what have you in public. We start seeing folks with these type of things in their face to try and block some of that from happening. Maybe we'll see that down at RSA this summer. At Black Hat. But it's funny when you think about what's on the camera, what the fingerprint, which is basically a camera in a way on your phone in some cases, as they try to make that screen be more one piece and look sexier and cleaner. their ability to sense that fingerprint and then, not just sense it, but do some things you're talking about, either check for temperature or check for a pulse, becomes harder and harder, especially in this little tiny space. And it makes you take a step back and go, okay, this thing which you're using for fingerprint or face-based authentication or any type of biometrics, what's the content of the data that you have on that, right? Do you just have your email on there normally? Do you want to put it into sort of a separate jailed instance, or maybe you don't put some of that sensitive stuff on your phone, period? I never got a chance to play with, what were they calling it? Android, or actually Galaxy used to have Fort Knox. So it'd be a VM in there that actually you could harden down and make it more secure. It seemed like a cool idea, but I never got a chance to play with it. I don't know if you guys have.
No, I haven't got a chance to play with that. And for as much as it's fun to joke about gummy bears, the fingerprint, face recognition, those are still far and above better than the password. So better than either no PIN or a 4-digit PIN. So it's more to call this out as attacks continue to evolve, attacks get better, but these defenses and these ways of authenticating people and checking on identity are still a lot better, and we need to move beyond these passwords. So I wouldn't necessarily say we're going in the wrong direction. It's just really interesting direction, and like you were calling out, John, it'll be cool to see what the makeup and vanity set looks like at Black Hat this year, when we can have some more fancy anti-face recognition makeup.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, this is why we see these adaptive authentication solutions continue to get a lot of traction in the market, because there are ways to bypass the fingerprint or potentially the facial recognition. Now you see these adaptive authentication looking at the way the phone is being held and the actions, and so they're trying to figure out, is it you? Is it really your fingerprint, or is it somebody else that has your fingerprint? And because the way they hold the phone or the way they interact with that phone is different, maybe I require you to do another authentication layer before I give you access to certain applications. So this market's already kind of evolved a little bit in these adaptive technologies. The question is that the right approach longer term? Because it potentially adds some complexity in to the authentication components of your application. It does secure it maybe a little better, but it's still, two-factor authentication is still a pain in the butt for most of us. And if your fingerprint is one, and then you have to do another layer on top of that, are we just making it more complex to get into your application?
I just need to say that if I ever have to solve a CAPTCHA to unlock my phone, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get violent.
Well, and that's so what you're kind of what you were mentioning there, Matt. Talking about that complexity, doing that analysis. There is a lot of already like machine learning that's going on, that's happening on device, which is pretty interesting. And one of the other things I wanted to pull out in the news this week is that machine learning and AI, these are not always magical algorithms, nor are these algorithms that are completely independent of humans. In fact, it's a maybe not unspoken, but maybe not unrealized as much in general, that there is all of these algorithms have ongoing training and tweaking to make them correct. And so what I'm getting to here is, there was a article in Bloomberg about, is anyone listening to you on Alexa? And the gist of it is that humans are listening, Amazon employees are listening to Alexa chats in order to annotate them. Now, ostensibly, this is used to quote, eliminate gaps in Alexa's understanding of human speech and help it better respond to commands. So basically is saying that, sometimes Alexa makes mistakes. It doesn't play the right song you wanted it to play. It doesn't order the right thing you wanted to order. So a human goes in, looks at that, listens to that chat, and says, oh, this is somebody who actually was ordering X, or they actually wanted to listen to this song rather than this other song. And humans have always been a part of that. The danger here is, what are humans doing with that level of access? And it's a couple, AppSec areas around that, just in the sense of how do you build a system that still needs to have some type of debugging of these systems, but disassociates identity so it can still be privacy respecting, if not privacy preserving, as well as instituting a culture of how do people play around with or manage and share the data that they're listening to.
It's sort of fun when you think back on our previous topic where we were making fun about those people who wouldn't want to upload something into the cloud, but at the same time, you wouldn't catch me dead with either an Alexa or a whatever the other one is from Amazon. No, Amazon's Alexa, and then the Google, whatever their smart speaker. You wouldn't catch me dead with one of those in my house. And I guess privacy super important to me. And there was stories about this topic about 8 weeks ago, for Google's Ring, where they now acquired Ring. They make a doorbell and a video camera. And It turned out they were super lax as a startup about how they were encrypting customer data. They were shipping it all over to, I think, the Ukraine to allow people to do the exact same thing, train and test their ML algorithms, right? So and for me, I guess it comes down to that standard sort of risk calculation. Like, so the doorbell, which is the doorbell camera facing out on my street, hey, sure, that's fine. I don't care if you're going to record that. I guess there could be some sensitive things there when you come and go and that type of thing. But at the same time, something inside the house, that to me is like super, oh, no, that I'm not going there. But someone has to, I think what it really comes down to is someone has to train this stuff. Someone has to get real world information to be able to school that ML and tune and tweak your curves, right? So I think it comes down to how do you clearly communicate to a customer, either opt into this or say, hey, we're going to be doing this. This is a new version. This is a new product. It's in beta. But you can't just go and do that type of stuff and not tell people. And that's what we're starting to see, that people react to that.
Yeah, and for me, it really stands out in that application security angle of the data layer. So you can have an awesome IDE where you can manage your CI/CD pipeline. You've got a lot of, whether it's pick your cloud provider, you're deploying and hardening systems, but that's awesome. You have a well-functioning system, but now what are you doing with the data in there? And that's a little bit why mentioned like DLP, how is data being exfiltrated because there was a mistake. But then even when you're using this data, whether it is biometric authenticators or these types of chats, or even if we get into like fraud and financial transactions, those are all different, really interesting threat models, or you could call them, mistake models or privacy models. In this sense, what you were calling out, John, is, do people understand that these chats need to be looked at in order to improve a service? And has that actual communication that this is happening on the back end been made to users? So there is that actual informed consent about what's going on, rather than just, well, this is pretty cool, I can just ask my always listening device to do X, Y, and Z for me, and lo and behold, stuff happens.
This is why I don't have, to John's point, Alexas in my house or those types of things. But the same thing outside of even the voice commands. Think about chatbots in those chatbots and how they're going to learn based on how you ask questions. They're going to have to pull that data too. There's a big data privacy issue that I think some people don't think about. I mean, consumers, I don't think about as much as maybe we do because we're in the security space. I don't use Siri. I don't use Alexa. I don't want that kind of stuff out. But a lot of people are willing to share that data or don't even know they're sharing that data as part of that. And that's that data angle that is always very interesting of how do you protect it? How do you limit it? How do you secure it? Because the other article is the Yahoo payout, which I thought was interesting, is, the settlement. I mean, this $117.5 million is nothing to sneeze at. Now, I didn't do the math. I don't know if it's in here on what that was per record. Maybe it wasn't that big because I think this was like a multi-billion record breach or something like that. But that's $117 million that I think Verizon has to pay because they ended up buying Yahoo, right?
Right, and I think if I remember the numbers, it was in this particular case the article called out affecting 194 million people and something like 894 million accounts or thereabouts. So it was close to 1 billion accounts at $117 million. So it's also like, at what point does the cost per record become meaningless? Or it either become meaningless because it's not conveying what the actual, cost of the breach is, because, at an almost, $5 billion purchase, that's not insignificant from Verizon's, purchase of Yahoo. And obviously there's a lot of this money that is going to, legal fees as well. But what about, the cost to individual consumers and having to deal with credential stuffing attacks, changing passwords, having to adopt their, better two-factor authentication or their biometric authentication. So just a compromised password isn't the end of the story for their access to all the other accounts because they just so happen to reuse that password elsewhere.
Yeah, I was digging into the article because this gets a little interesting. Verizon originally agreed to pay $4.83 billion for Yahoo, and then when the breach came out, they negotiated that down to $4.48 billion, which means they reduced it by $350 million, but only had to pay out $117.5 million as part of the settlement. I don't know. I think Verizon did okay on that deal.
Looks like they may have.
It's a different way to look at the numbers, folks.
Yes, exactly. Without trying to become cynical about it and say, yes, we still need security. Because speaking of security, also there was a really fun, so you guys, doesn't sound like you have any of the home listening devices. I don't know if you might have at home a Verizon Fios Quantum Gateway. Basically, it's a home router for Fios. But Tenable did some really fun and interesting vulns they discovered in this. One was actually a critical vuln that was basically a command injection against a username parameter, which is pretty egregious and critical. The other one, to me, though, was a high risk that was also a command injection that was authenticated. This one in particular stood out for me because of just how interesting and simple it was. So basically, you could create you could update the firewall rules essentially on this gateway, and it would be done by a JSON blob. And in the JSON blob, there's just a name value pair of host name and the value, the name of the host. In this, you could use backticks for that host name, and those backticks then, for those of you already thinking ahead and guessing, will be interpreted by the underlying shell interpreter. So bash, for example, is just going to say, cool, I see something in backticks. I'm going to use command substitution. So whatever this is, whether it's just a simple who am I, which is what the Tenable researchers use in their example, or run some other arbitrary command, is pretty impressive. Just in the sense of how simple it is to modify that value and how powerful and impactful the ultimate outcome is. And the other reason I thought it was kind of fun is talking about where these barriers are between your data checks and these sort of impedance mismatches with all of the services that you might be putting together. In this case, we're talking about services on a small scale. So we have a JSON blob that's turning into a shell command. So all of the great validation and the nice way that JSON is hard to break out. It's a pretty nice, human-friendly, readable data encapsulation mechanism. But once you go out of there and backticks become something more meaningful inside the underlying command that was passed off to, bad things happen.
Yeah, I think there's been similar attacks in email and some other things where you can pass some of these commands and injections through. I think this is a firmware related issue in the case of the Fios router, and I'm CenturyLink, so I don't have Verizon Fios out here, so I'm not vulnerable, thank goodness. But I mean, it could happen in other devices potentially as well, just for the exact same reason.
Yeah, and even talking about bringing things together, talking about email and threat modeling. Google announced that Gmail was making email more secure by using STS, so strict transport security. It has been around at the HTTP layer, so meaning that that'll enforce TLS connections once you put this header in there. But now mail to mail, so MTA to MTA communications, which can be and should be encrypted at the transport layer, don't always have to be encrypted. So the TLS between MTAs has always been opportunistic, sort of a please can we do this and talk securely. But now with using STS, it's being enforced. And so Gmail was one of it's great to see in the entire ecosystem for a big company like Gmail to roll this out, because that's just going to encourage other people, hopefully, to support it. So it's not going to protect us, what you were just calling out as command injection, but it is going to at least protect us from having stronger guaranteed encryption between email delivery systems.
So I'm curious on how this gets. Is Google going to force people to update their DNS and in their mail to support this, or is it on customers to actually proactively go out and leverage this new capability? Because I wasn't quite clear how this was going to get rolled out.
Yeah, so it's been around for a while, at least the RFC for this, talking about strict transport security. And so what Google has done is saying, hey, we believe in this, we're rolling it out. Unfortunately, what it means is that everyone else who's running their own email service also needs to agree that, yeah, actually, this is a good idea to enforce TLS between different MTAs. So, delivery between these major email providers is secured. So this, I think, isn't as strong a rollout as Google saying, with Chrome, that we're going to start, calling out sites as being insecure, or demoting them on search results, that type of thing. So this is more of, hopefully, Google leading, and hopefully others will follow for good reasons. One of the things that came across to me is that there's a tool from Qualys, SSL Labs, that Ivan Ristic, who's well known within the SSL world, as well as those of you who've ever done anything with mod security. He pioneered development of that SSL Labs, which was a great way just to be able to do monitoring of how, on a letter scale, A through F, how good is a website's TLS deployment. What Ivan has done now is created this new site called Hardenize. And what's really cool there is he and his team have gone beyond just looking at that HTTP layer and being able to look at things like this MTA, strict transport security, as well as DNS settings. So it's a service where you can at a glance say, how well configured am I? And that, hey, maybe since I'm not using this new STS, that I could be, and that deploying it may not be completely trivial, but it's at least a thing we want to encourage to do. So I guess right now we're still in the phase of encouraging adoption rather than really strictly driving adoption, or we don't really have in the sense of carrot and stick, we don't have too much of a stick right now to push people into adopting more transport layer encryption.
So SSL Labs was, I think, free originally, and I think when Qualys rolled it out, I think it's still free. John, you'd probably know better than I do. Is Hardenize a free tool that people can use to go validate their encryption setup on their different websites? Is it a similar model?
Yeah, it's a similar model. So they do have a paid version that they're trialing with a bunch of partners, but you can just go to their website and you can see that I peeked, and I don't want to embarrass us too much, but I just peeked at what our securityweekly.com might look like. And there's a couple things we might improve around our DNS and our MTA, for example. But anyone can go there and look at that, look at some domain and just see how well configured is it at the HTTP, DNS, and email layer.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's a great tool for people to be able to use and just understand where some potential gaps are in the way they're protecting their main public sites.
Yeah.
These things they're actually, I'm just looking at that report for Security Weekly. But these things are really, really important and really useful for the system and of either the home system. And if you're still running a mail server, sorry guys, I stopped doing that years ago. But either for someone who's running a mail server at home, or you've got your home web server, or maybe you're the corporate IT guy. It's one thing to go through and you get tasked with, okay, I'm going to set up my TLS certs right and make sure my server's right and all that. But how to test it? I mean, you can go through and Google around and find usually a way to do it with OpenSSL, or I don't know how you'd test. I guess you'd use OpenSSL to test out your mail server stuff as well.
Yeah.
But then here they're also testing for like SPF and DMARC, and being able to automate all that type of stuff and just like look at a report that says, hey, you're good, or this is what you need to change. That's really helpful for folks.
Yeah, and I like it too because it's very simple and very specific list of items that are really actionable. So it's like you're saying, like, what's DMARC look like? What's your SPF look like? On your web layer, do you have HSTS deployed? Are you using SRI or CSP headers? Things like that. And these are, to a degree, CSP is a little more complicated, so maybe I'll pull that out. But to a degree, these are very simple, straightforward things that are just smart hardening steps. So it's that theme of how can we show developers, show that DevOps team, give them some very simple automated information and automated feedback so that they can take some very simple and concrete steps to improve the security of their ecosystem.
Yeah, I just texted that report to Paul so you can take a look at the Security Weekly site.
Always opportunities for improvement, right?
Of course.
Well, and what was funny too, actually, there was another another link on Hardenize. So SSL Labs had their state of TLS around the world, and Hardenize has a similar thing. And if you look at their, I'm not exactly sure how they rate their top 500 hosts, but of 500 hosts, only 28% of them were well configured from a web perspective, and only 37 were well configured from an email perspective. So it's also like, set aside all the really fun and cool stuff that we were talking about with Kubernetes and playing with containers and all the neat things that we can do on AWS and Google Cloud and Azure. There's still a lot of basic stuff that people either aren't aware of or they just haven't done yet. So we're sort of not quite alone in that massive crowd of improving encryption and improving configurations throughout the internet.
Yeah, maybe it's interesting. I'd like to see a broader set. I think it's 500 hosts that were tested. I'd like to see. I think one of the things we did with SSL way back in the day when it came under the Qualys umbrella was try to go out and scan a bunch more sites and get a much broader global view. It'd be interesting as more sites come in, what these numbers look like over time, because I think it would be interesting to see, is it improving or is it not improving?
Yeah, and I'd love to see too, is it just by default, then the nature of if you're running on one of the major cloud providers, by default, you're actually already better, or even slice it, by PCI. PCI, maybe, people, I often hear people, just having that discussion between the difference between compliance and security. But I want to make the hypothesis that PCI has been a good driver for getting TLS adoption better for sites. So I'd love to see more data and be able to slice it in a couple different ways just to figure out what is driving and encouraging adoption, or just making this type of default security better, and say, cool, let's do more of that.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah, because I think PCI has done a really good job when it comes to TLS adoption. But does that mean in general, globally, we're better? Or was it only for those that were under PCI? They're better.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. What are the motivators, or what's the tool set that's making a lot nicer?
It'd
Yeah,
be
and
interesting
speaking,
to see something like this from a, bring it back to the show topic, more of just, pure AppSec. And I'm sort of thinking through, I'm not quite sure what that would look like, but maybe one of the scanners going and doing let's do a scan of top 500 websites and go, okay, how are we looking from an OWASP top 10 point of view, maybe? Or, some of those sort of more standard application type things. That'd be interesting to see. I'm not quite sure what that looked like, but it'd be, if someone wants to tinker with that, I'd love to see what's out there. I don't know if you guys have seen something like that. I haven't.
no, and I'm curious to see with Google's their cloud security scanner, because it does basic cross-site scripting checking and vulnerable library checking. So just those two things. I like the idea of constraining the problem set to something that's small. I'd love to see over time if they will be aggregating and anonymizing information like that. But, give us a report. Like, is there something correlated with size of developments or size of deployments, languages, things like that? So maybe we're starting to see these small things emerge, as well as that Azure and their cloud fuzzing. So maybe let's check back in a year again, and then see maybe this conversation will actually have some fun data to actually be talking about. I think, speaking of security, I think, John, was there another breach that came across your radar that you wanted to chat about?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Since we're talking about mail, yeah, Outlook.com.
Yeah.
They were turns out they've had some people inside that site for the last, I believe it's 3 months, that really shouldn't have been inside there. So when this first came out from Microsoft, announced this about a week and a half ago, the headlines were around, they could only see, I think, subjects and to from, so sort of more the metadata type thing. And then this week it's coming out that, it looks like those guys were able to see full email content. So if you're an Outlook.com member, I have bad news for you. And it's at least they announced it, and they're sharing and they're giving us details about what happened. So that's a good thing. And it's funny because 2 or 3 startups back when I was at Stratosec, I had all my stuff onto a 365 from the point of view of, as I was just making jokes about, hey guys, I don't run a mail server anymore. And it's the reason I don't do that is because A, they're paying me to do it right, all the stuff we're talking about. And B, I expect that a large provider is going to be able to do that better, especially, someone who has millions, if not billions of accounts. And it looks like maybe I might have to go back and rethink what I'm saying. So they were in the news. We haven't heard the details yet, at least I haven't, about what the actual compromise, how the guys get in. I don't know how much that we'll hear. We'll see over the coming weeks. But it happens to any of us, happens to the best of us.
Yeah, and the fun parts that come out for me is listening to how long did it take them to detect the compromise, and what was the dwell time? How long were the attackers on that system? Because those are two numbers that have been coming out, reported a lot in other forensic reports, and it's always interesting just in that sense of, even if you wanted to go back and run your own email server, do you also now need to run your own monitoring, logging, alerting, and do your own incident response on there? Because there's a lot more to it to figure out that confidence that, I'm running my secure mail and it is still secure without having that question mark pop up at the end of that sentence.
Yeah, it's so difficult to do all these things, right? And as we go down these paths of getting more and more complex, the Kubernetes and the clouds and the mails and all these type of things, there's more and more stuff that you have to do from an operational point of view. I was leaving my place this morning and I forgot, I saw this cable dangling out of my router at home. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I've got a new little IoT thing that I'm playing with, a Rock 64 Pro. And I thought it occurred to me, how easy would it be for someone to just come and plug something into my house, if I'm away, or, the house cleaners or what have you, 10 million things. And do I have any way of knowing that something new is showing up on my network at home? This is, I take operational security pretty seriously, and I still don't have my house locked down like that. Or hopefully by the time, people start listening to this podcast, I will. But, it's something for us to think about. And, how do you track all that stuff and all these things you got to do, it becomes more and more complex.
Yeah, especially when you can do so much with a little Raspberry Pi that it would be really hard to even, someone with physical access can hide something really tiny and be really easy to miss that. So I don't know, Matt, have we made you even more worried about your home environment now? Anything else on your mind?
Nope, I'm just going to keep it disconnected except for my fiber connection to my podcast
Sounds good.
machine.
as long as we get to talk with you on a weekly basis, that'll be good. So please keep the network on for that.
Right.
Any other news that we should chat about?
I'm not going to call it news, but I have to point it out since we had it in the list. Patch Tuesday, Flash Tuesday, we've got another vulnerability in Flash. This is like the cockroach of insecure apps. When is this thing going to go away?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Last week we also had that brief discussion about how much backwards compatibility do we need to keep and maintain, or can we just move forward? Flash, unfortunately, just looks like that horrible pathological case where it's like this actually needs to be dead. Get rid of it, move it out, and go. Let's move on to something else.
I don't know what the size of this application is. I don't know if you guys have ever heard a line count for it or approximation, but it seems by now they could have rewritten this whole thing and made it a little more tight. Or like I said, just shoot it and put it out of its misery. Neither seems to happen. So we'll talk about this in a few more weeks again.
Yeah, they keep it sandbox in Chrome. It's sort of that necessary evil. And I suppose one of the things I was thinking about with that cloud security scanner, also waiting for the day where somebody throws up on their Google Cloud deployment, they start a whole slew of browser exploits. And somebody tries to actually see if they can pop the web scanner that is being run against them. Because that's one of the other nefarious types of thinking. And the type of thing when you're working on scanners, you also have to keep in the back of your mind as a threat model, because even though you're scanning someone for vulnerabilities, you got to be careful about what attack surface you're exposing in your scanner and how you're parsing all the images and all the JSON and all the other data that's coming back, because you don't want to accidentally start executing a bunch of vulnerabilities inside your own scanning system. So if we're going to have a theme of threat modeling as well this week, I'm going to throw that one out there as well.
Surprised we haven't heard about more of compromises like that, right? That's the type of thing, if you leave people like me around with idle time, that we start playing with. Like, hey, let's go and let's make ourselves exposed and have someone try to come and poke at us or scan at us and sort of get a little bit of a surprise number out of it. So it's surprised we don't hear more about that type of compromise.
Yeah, I know that there's been. I'll have to do some homework now, because I know there have been some Black Hat, DEF CON, other conference talks about vulnerable malware, attacking back or in malware vulnerabilities, as well as attacking, security tools. So we'll have to throw together a list and have a good conversation about that too.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Cool. So what do we think, Matt? Have we wrapped up our weekly application security?
I think we covered it all. You should take us out, Mike.
That sounds awesome. Well, thanks again to Matt and John and everyone else for joining us. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.
See you guys.